Probably we've had more talk in this country since San Bernardino and Paris and other things about self-defense as we see more active shooter situations around the country on a regular basis, almost daily. And so where we used to just worry about training our military to learn how to use guns and weapons, we maybe now have a need and we're maybe seeing more of the kind of training for regular folk out there. And that brings us to our next guest here in the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA as we enter hour number 2 on a Thursday morning. He is Chris Sajnog. He's been with us before. He is one of our American heroes. He was a Navy SEAL veteran, a senior sharpshooter instructor. In fact, he trained Chris Kyle, who was the subject of the movie American Sniper. And, of course, Chris Kyle tragically killed in a gun incident. And the topic this morning really is kind of twofold: training regular folk for active shooting situations, America's new normal, and also women get your guns. It seems like women gun owners, there's a report out now that that's the fastest growing segment in shooting sports. And with us this morning again, Chris Sajnog. Chris, thanks so much for rejoining us. Always great to have you on the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Gary.
Chris, you talk about the new normal in America. And we've seen all kinds of visuals out there on shooting incidents at almost far too regular a basis, unfortunately. And so guys like you now are people who we turn to and we say, okay, we used to just train people like Chris Kyle and others out there. Now it's regular folk that are kind of turning to you. Is that right?
You know, it is right. But unfortunately, most people that buy firearms actually aren't getting the training that they need. And those that are getting some training aren't getting the proper training. So that's, just really important that people plan out your training before you even think about buying a firearm.
What kind of training is the proper training, Chris, from your vantage point?
Well, for the last 50 years, the way people learned how to shoot was they would go to the range and look at somebody who shoots well, and they would copy what they do. And, that's just not the right way to do it. And, I compare it to if somebody wanted to shoot basketball like Michael Jordan, they wouldn't look at how he holds the ball in his hand or how he stands. They would look at how he trains, and that's what he's famous for.
Right.
He's not famous for how he held the ball. He's famous for staying after practice and staying in one spot and shooting, ball after ball until, he couldn't miss. And that's what made him great.
I actually had a chance
to do the same thing,
right,
to learn how to shoot.
I actually had a chance to see him in practice when he played in North Carolina. First guy into practice, last guy to leave, and doing exactly what you're talking about. I mean, constantly working on it. And they often talked about his mentality at wanting to win was incredible, beyond what most people even think about in that regard. So wanting to do it successfully is really important. But, I'll give you a great example, Chris. My wife and I are out. We're getting ready to purchase a gun. Each of us is going to have a gun. All right, because we in a day and age we want to be able to protect ourselves. Never thought about that until now. So take me through it, because I haven't gotten to the next step yet. I haven't started to train or anything like that. I haven't bought the gun yet. But after you purchase the gun legally, where's my next step? Where should I go? Take me through like I would be, America's novices here and getting out there and starting to train.
Well, I developed the new rules of marksmanship. It's a new way to teach people how to actually develop any skill, but specifically for learning how to shoot.
Right.
And that is that you need to train your mind. You need to plan out your training. You need to use physics, or what I call use mechanics and not somebody else's methods, like watching, how Michael Jordan holds the ball, for instance. You need to use dry weapons training. You need to use deliberate practice, and you need constant feedback. So, all of this is based on how your brain works and how it learns new skills. And it learns new skills anytime you do anything or even think about something. You build myelination around a neural pathway. So whether you do it right or whether you do it wrong, you're teaching your body to do it that way again more efficiently. So what happens is most people will go to the range. They don't know how to shoot yet. They haven't learned, so they go there to learn. But then they flinch or they anticipate the round. They're scared a little bit. Everybody is, because there's a big explosion going off in your hand. And then they flinch. Well, that is built into that neural pathway now. So every time you go to shoot, you're going to do that again. So what you need to do is you need to learn to shoot at home. You need to learn to shoot off the range. obviously safely with an empty firearm. And there's other tools you can use like airsoft weapons or blue guns or laser, firearms. There's all kinds of great tools. So you learn how to shoot, you build a perfect neural pathway, and then you go to the range to make sure you're doing it, doing it correctly.
So you're actually practicing. It's kind of like we used to do when we were kids a little bit. But you're using something a little bit more than that in practicing, and practice shooting something that's not really going to be the gun, but it's going to be something close to that, right?
Yeah, if you look at any other sport, like take a football team, they don't practice at a game. They don't, okay, we need to work on this play. Let's go do it. No, they run drills, drill after drill, receivers running the same route over and over, and the quarterback throwing the ball to that specific spot over and over and over. That is dry weapons training. It's doing those things perfectly until it's game time, and then that's when you're ready.
Can you simulate firing a gun, though, when you're even doing the dry weapons training? Can you really simulate that kick you're going to get, or is that how do you make that crossover to that point?
Well, a lot of people ask that question, and it's really interesting because if you don't focus on that, the gun's not going to kick that much. It's really not as bad as most people think. But the reason they think it's like that is because they haven't learned to control the gun, and then the first time they shoot, it jumps in their hands. So now they expect it to do that. So you can work on things, you mentioned women in your opening.
Yes.
One of the best things, not just for women, any shooter, especially for handguns, is to work on your grip strength. Get a grip strength ball or a, Captains of Crunch grippers.
Right.
And three times a week, work on your grip strength, because if you can have, your gun like it's in a vice because your hands are so strong, that gun's not going to move anywhere.
We're talking with Chris Sajnog right this morning. Chris, you've written this book. Tell people a little bit about the book and where they can get that.
My new book is Navy SEAL Shooting. It's available on Amazon.com, and it's also available on my website at chrissajnog, SAJNOG.com.
Chris, one of the things that you put in there is about Navy SEAL shooting. You say, I've trained the world's deadliest snipers, and now I'm teaching everyday citizens the life-saving techniques required to protect their families. Isn't it kind of a sad litany in a way that we now are seeing the pickup of weapons by people because they see a lot of what's going on out there with the San Bernardino shootings, even looking across the ocean at Paris and other shootings that are happening here all the time, and we're saying, oh my gosh, that's always going to happen to somebody else, but all of a sudden it's coming home here to Main Street America. So in a way, it's very sad to see that we've kind of come to this point, isn't it?
It's very sad, Gary, and I'll tell you, I've got two young boys. I stopped watching the news about a year ago because I had to, I got tired of having to explain to them why, some kids got shot in the school, and, they started getting worried about going to school. So, I'll tell you, I've been a lot happier since I've done that. But, yeah, people definitely are concerned, and they should be. We
were talking today, a colleague of mine, we were having a really good conversation, and he said, I have a policeman that lives behind me. He said, I keep the light on. I do all this stuff. But he said, I think if people want to come in and rob me, that's fine. But he said, I don't think people really want to come in to kill me. And yet we've seen this random kind of stuff around the country where people just go in and shoot someplace up and we don't know what's going on in their heads. And so, I'm sure a lot of people come to you and say, well, here you're teaching people how to shoot guns. You're just exacerbating the problem. I would disagree with them, obviously, and say, you're kind of being prepared. I mean, you like to turn the TV off and walk away, and yet that doesn't mean the problems aren't still out there lurking, right?
Definitely. And of course, my job is teaching people how to shoot firearms, but I'm the first one to tell you a firearm is not the right choice for, a lot of people. And people need to, that's why you need to plan, prepare, practice, and then pick what your equipment is that you're going to use. And sometimes, the equipment that you pick, a firearm is not the best choice for everybody. It depends on, your situation, where you're at, where you live. Maybe some people just can't shoot a firearm. It's unfortunate. But, some people will never learn to do a lot of things. And so don't just go out and buy a gun. and then, figure out, I can't, shoot it because I live in this small apartment, and if I, miss my target, the bullet's going to go through the wall, or, whatever the situation is. You need to come up with a plan first.
What I do want to ask you this, kind of going along here, and because you've lived with firearms a good part of your life, and you've taught people how to use them. What about, we hear an awful lot in our country today about keeping firearms, and I'm sure we'll hear it tonight even maybe on the debates, keeping firearms out of the hands of people with mental disorders. What's your solution? What do we do in this country in terms of trying, there's no way we're going to stop all, these kind of shootings from happening. The president's even said that. But it does seem to me that maybe we have to do something to try to keep them out of the hands of people who mentally should not have them in their hands or otherwise. What are your thoughts about all that?
Well, it's a real problem that we have, and I'm actually working with a woman, and I won't use her name, but she has a son who's grown up, and her son has shown these signs that these shooters have shown, when they were young. And she has gone to the police and she's gone to the school board and told them, hey, you need to do something about my son, and explain the things that he's doing. And they won't do anything about it because they don't want to ostracize him and, make him feel bad. So we've got a real problem in this country with, like the word profiling. People think the word profiling is bad. But, if you are, any species that wants to survive very long needs to profile. So we need to do that, and we need to not be afraid to look at each other, especially when it comes to possessing, a tool that has the potential to do harm like that.
You take your training as a Navy SEAL sharpshooter, and you now bring it to the public. So here you are, and the chances seem like, again, fortunately, there's a minority of incidents around the country, but with 24/7 news, we're seeing more of them every day in a much more visual world. What do you tell people when you're training them? And I'm sure people are coming to you and asking, okay, what do I shoot at? How do I shoot? What do I do? I'm in an active shooting situation. Someone comes at me. You talked about the 4 Ps there a moment ago. What are the things that I need to do in terms of practicing? Because I imagine this isn't something you just say, well, here, when this happens, this is what you do. This is something you almost have to practice on a regular basis, isn't it?
Well, the first thing you need to do is you need to train your mind to be able to deal with those situations. And like I said, a lot of people that do train, they will go to the range and they'll shoot at a paper target that's, standing there in front of them, and they'll hit that and think they're good. And we've seen this with law enforcement, because the sad fact is that statistically, even law enforcement, trained law enforcement officers miss 75% of the time when they shoot, at their target. And that's because they're not trained properly. So what you need to do is you need to practice pointing something like a firearm at somebody and pulling the trigger, because that is a big stressor if you've never done it before.
Yeah.
So obviously when you do that, you're going to use the right tool for the job. You're not going to use a loaded firearm. But there's other things like simunition, little paintball rounds, there's airsoft, there's laser guns, there's all kinds of different tools you can use. But even just running through it, different scenarios in your mind, and thinking about what you would do, just using visualization exercises, which, again, all the great athletes in every sport use visualization. One of the big reasons they get there is because you can visualize and think about all these different scenarios and what are you going to do? How are you going to react?
It's funny.
That comes down to planning and preparing.
Just kind of occurred by accident, but the lady on just before you, Catherine Agranovich, was a hypnotherapist, and we were talking about hypnotherapy and also psycho-cybernetics. And I said practicing doing things successfully and programming your mind to be successful in how it looked at things and how it got things accomplished. And you kind of just relayed that on as far as how it goes with athletes. And I guess it also goes with people who are going to have to shoot a gun. You have to have a vision of what you're going to do. We're going to come back and talk more about this, Chris. I want to get more into, so you have a lot of people out there who live by the rules. They have a firearm. They've never fired it before. And yet you're dealing in a situation where people aren't living by the rules and they're firing firearms. And you've now got one. What do you do in that situation? We're going to ask Chris Sajnog that question when we come back here on the Gary Sutton Show. It's News Radio 910 WSBA. Back right after this. Back with Chris Sajnog, who is a Navy SEAL veteran, senior sharpshooter instructor, one of the heroes that walk among us. Trained Chris Kyle and has trained so many other sharpshooters. He's author of a brand new book called Navy SEAL Shooting. Trained some of the world's deadliest snipers, and now he is training regular Americans and has some thoughts about how to train regular Americans who are in active shooting situations. It's interesting, Chris, when I talk to people and they'll say, we've talked about gun issues, and I'll say, are you a gun owner? And they'll say, yeah. I said, how many people have you shot? And they'll say, well, none. Kind of incredulous that I would even ask that. And I said, well, why not? Well, I just have the gun. I use it for sport, or I use it just for protection. I've never had to use it. And so you have regular people who operate by the rules on a regular basis, and you go into a situation, maybe if you have the right to carry a concealed weapon, or if you have the proper accreditation to carry a concealed weapon. You walk into a situation. Now you have someone who doesn't obey the rules, who all of a sudden shows up and starts to do things. What do you do in that situation? There, it comes back to what you were talking about in terms of the 4 Ps. But I also read something here about the SEAL loop, and I wanted to find out a little bit about that too. But for people who are used to operating in lawful situations, to be in an unlawful one is kind of a whole different chaotic situation than they've ever experienced before, right?
Definitely, and I hate to say it, Gary, but I got to go in just a couple minutes.
That's fine.
Yeah, people need to practice. That's what it comes down to. Don't wait until you're in that situation. And, I'll just tell you, the SEAL loop is to see or sense what's going on around you, evaluate what you need to do, act, whatever that action is that you decided on, and then learn from that. And the great thing about a loop is that there's no beginning or end, so you can jump in at any point. And I highly recommend you jump in at that learning point. And
you better be measured and bring some order to that chaotic situation as you do it, right?
Yeah, definitely. And, it all comes down to training your mind. And one of the best things you can do is meditate and learn to focus your mind, so when you need to draw on that mental capacity, your mind is ready to react.
Chris, thanks as always for being on. Appreciate your service to our country and service to individuals out there now trying to learn this. And again, where can people pick up your book, Navy SEAL Shooting?
It's available on Amazon.com or on ChrisSajnog.com as well.
And that's SAJNOG.com. Chris, thanks so much, and appreciate all that you're doing.
All right. Thank you, Gary.
Take care now. Chris Sajnog with us here on the Gary Sutton Show. Interesting, this guy was a Navy SEAL sniper shooter, has trained, as we said, some of the deadliest snipers in the world, Chris Kyle being one of them. But you think about it today, and, I feel almost kind of weird talking about getting a firearm, and yet at the same time, we look around today and we do say, well, we need to defend ourselves, right? And we have the debate going on in our country. Would we be better off if you had people in situations like we saw in San Bernardino who were carrying firearms with them and could fight back? Is that the way to go? If not, what are some of the other ways that we can be prepared? Because it seems to be having a more and more random kind of right here next to me on Main Street feel than it ever has before in our country today. And I think all of us want to be ready for that when it comes. We become maybe a little bit more sensitive to what goes on around us. Maybe we're a little bit more observant to what goes on around us. We walk into a situation. I was sitting the other day. It's funny. I walked into a Subway shop, and I was sitting there, and I don't even know why this crossed my mind. So it just, the mind is weird sometimes. But I'm sitting there thinking, what if somebody walked in here right now and started to shoot the place up? I don't know why I even thought that. I know that sounds really strange. So, but I did, and you start to kind of, as Chris said, you kind of mentally rehearse what would I do in those situations, and you think about it. It's not really that weird. I suspect that some of you that have kids in your house probably have fire drills. Where would I go if there was a fire? What would I do? Some of you maybe have those stickers on the windows about where firemen should go if they're coming to your kid's room. What would happen if we had a fire situation. Well, is this so much different in the present day world? What would I do in an active shooting situation? What would, and I'm sure people that are in charge of stores, convenience stores or places like that, have been given directions on this is how you've got to handle it. So you literally have drills. I remember we had drills in our school when I taught. Fire drills. You go outside, you stand, you had to see how fast you get out of the building, where you had to go. When I got on the cruise this year to go up to New England, very first thing we did was to have to go outside, go to the proper exit, get in the proper place, know what to do, know where we're going to go if there was some kind of emergency on board the ship. So we have these drills. So what makes it so different to have a drill where if, God forbid, there was some kind of active shooting situation or a violent situation taking place? What would you do to the extent that you could in that moment? Chris kind of is talking about that as a how-to. Check out his book, Navy SEAL Shooting. You can go to Chris Sajnog, SAJNOG.com, or you can check on Amazon.com for Chris Sajnog's Navy SEAL Shooting. Really interesting topic here this morning on the Gary Sutton Show.